Have you ever seen destiny act relentlessly? Have you ever witnessed someone being humiliated only to see that person come back in an unbelievable way? Some life lessons come with a high price, and this story is proof that arrogance always takes its toll. She thought she could laugh, mock and belittle. She felt on top of the world, surrounded by wealth and power. But in just 5 minutes, everything changed. What began as a night of glamour and exclusivity soon turned into a spectacle of poetic justice, where the twist was so shocking that it left everyone around in shock. Snoop Dogg didn't need to prove anything to anyone, a global icon, owner of an immense fortune, but above all someone who understands the value of respect. He entered that event without fanfare, without ostentation, without security guards, but one look was enough for that woman to laugh, judging him by his appearance. Little did she know that she was about to become the protagonist of her own humiliation. Fate has unexpected ways of teaching humility, and that night, amid glasses of champagne and high society conversations, justice was served in the most unexpected way possible. Now the question is, how far did this woman go with her arrogance? And how did Snoop Dogg reverse the situation so brilliantly that she regretted it bitterly? The room sparkled with imposing chandeliers, tables adorned with crystal glasses, and an elite who mingled with practiced smiles and conversations about million-dollar deals. It was a night reserved only for the most powerful, those who commanded empires and were used to being treated as gods. Among them, a billionaire who exuded arrogance. Dressed in an impeccable outfit, sparkling jewelry, and a look that overflowed with superiority, she felt untouchable. For her, status and appearance were everything. Anyone who didn't follow his standard didn't even deserve to be noticed. But then, something unexpected happened. Among the guests, without any ostentation, without camera flashes or an army of security guards, was him. Snoop Dogg entered the event discreetly, wearing something simple, without the need to prove anything to anyone. Unlike those around him, he did not need to display wealth to be powerful. He was a living legend, but there, at that moment, in the billionaire's eyes, he was nothing more than someone out of his league. It was a matter of seconds for contempt to take over her expression. His lips curved into a sarcastic smile as his equally arrogant friends followed his gaze. Ironic whispers began to circulate among the group. One of them, with a restrained laugh, poked the woman's arm and discreetly pointed at Snoop. "Look at this guy," she whispered, without the slightest concern if he heard. "Does he think he can blend in with us?" He must be lost. The entire table burst into laughter. For them, it was a joke. The mere fact that someone who wasn't sporting a designer suit or a diamond-studded Rolex was there, in the same room as them, seemed absurd. After all, what mattered there was not who you were, but what you appeared to be. Snoop Dogg remained calm. His calm gaze wandered around the room, observing the reactions around him, but he didn't retaliate. There was no rush. Time would show who was really in control of that situation. The billionaire continued with her mockery, gesturing exaggeratedly to her friends. Her tone rose slightly, as if to make sure he heard. The contempt was evident. Does he know where he is? Or did he come to ask for an autograph? More laughter echoed throughout the room. The group seemed to have fun with the situation, as if Snoop Dogg's presence was a mistake someone had made in allowing him to enter. But what they didn't know was that they were about to make one of the biggest mistakes of their lives. Time seemed to move slower. Some eyes began to turn to the scene, curious about what was causing so much mockery. Some people realized what was happening, but no one intervened. After all, in that world the rules were clear. Those at the top felt they had the right to ridicule those they considered inferior. The billionaire, feeling that she had the perfect audience for her joke, took her arrogance a step further. "I bet he doesn't even have an invitation," Someone should resolve this. She gestured impatiently to one of the event's security guards, who hesitated for a moment. There was something about that man, that calm, unwavering presence, that seemed unusual, but the order was given. The security guard began to slowly walk towards Snoop Dogg, while the billionaire watched everything with a satisfied smile. For her, this was just another moment where the unwanted would be put in their place. But what she didn't imagine was that this moment would be marked as the most embarrassing of her life. And now, I want to hear from you. What would you do if you were in Snoop Dogg's shoes? Would he remain calm, or would he give change on the spot? Comment below. I want to see your opinion. Write respect always if you believe that no one should be judged by their appearance. I read all the comments, so be sure to participate and take the opportunity to leave a like, because it helps a lot to bring more stories like this to you. If you're not already subscribed, click the subscribe button and activate the bell so you don't miss any epic twists like this. But calm down, because this story is far from over. You won't believe what happened when security finally got to Snoop Dogg. The game turned in a way that made the billionaire regret it bitterly, and do you want to know what he did? So get ready, because what comes next will leave everyone speechless. Snoop Dogg remained seated, calm, observing everything around him with that serene look of someone who has seen everything in life. The laughter of the billionaire and her friends echoed throughout the room, but he didn't even show any discomfort. He just smiled as if he already knew exactly what was about to happen. The woman's arrogance was nothing new to him. People like this existed everywhere, always judging others by their appearance, believing that money and status made them superior. But that night, she would have a lesson she would never forget. The security guard, a tall, robust man, hesitated for a moment before approaching. He recognized Snoop Dogg right away, but seemed confused about what to do. After all, how could he ask someone like Snoop to withdraw from the event without looking completely ridiculous? However, the billionaire, impatient and blinded by her own ego, insisted. "What are you waiting for?" "Do your job," she said, crossing her arms with a superior smile. Her friends laughed once again. To them, it was just another fun episode, a moment to reinforce their elite position over someone who, in their view, clearly didn't belong there. The security guard cleared his throat and approached Snoop Dogg, trying to be discreet. "Sir, He couldn't complete the sentence. Snoop Dogg slowly raised his head and looked at him, still smiling. The security guard swallowed hard. The situation was delicate. He knew he was about to make a terrible mistake, but he was under pressure. His eyes quickly searched the event organizer's gaze, expecting some type of instruction. But the organizer had already realized what was happening and preferred to watch from afar, waiting to see how far the situation would go. Snoop Dogg, without changing, slowly stood up. He adjusted his jacket, put his hands in his pockets and looked around. The hall was silent now, with several people realizing what was happening. The anticipation in the air was palpable. "Is there a problem, partner?" he asked, his voice calm and full of unshakable charisma. The security guard became even more uncomfortable. The billionaire, on the other hand, took the opportunity to increase her humiliation. "Yes, there is a problem," she interrupted, taking a step forward. "This event is exclusive to special guests. It's not just any hip-hop festival. So, whoever you are, you might want to look elsewhere." Her arrogance was unbelievable. Snoop Dogg let out a low laugh, shaking his head slightly. He didn't need to respond right away. The silence itself was already doing its work. By now, several people around had already recognized who he was. Some were shocked by the woman's audacity, others just waited anxiously to see her reaction. He looked straight into her eyes, still smiling. "Are you sure about this?" The billionaire snorted, as if bored. "Of course I do. Now please, I don't want to ruin my night with this." Her friends laughed once more, but now their laughs were less confident. They also began to realize that something was wrong. Snoop Dogg took a deep breath and turned to the security guard. Dude, do your job. If she's saying I can't stay here, I guess I have no other choice, right? The security guard hesitated once again, but the billionaire made an impatient gesture as if ordering him to take action. Yes, do it at once, she insisted. The security guard looked at Snoop Dogg, still uncertain. But before he could act, a firm voice echoed through the hall. Wait a minute. Everyone turned to see a well-dressed man hurriedly walking towards them. He was clearly angry, and his presence made the billionaire lose some confidence. What the hell is going on here, he asked, looking at Snoop Dogg and then at the security guard. The security guard hesitated before responding. This lady asked me to remove this man from the event. The organizer frowned in confusion. How absurd! Do you know who he is? The silence in the hall was total. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the answer. The billionaire, however, continued with her superior pose, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. I don't care who he is, she said with a smug smile. If you don't have an invitation, you shouldn't be here. The organizer looked at her in disbelief and then turned to Snoop Dogg, shaking his hand firmly. Mr. Dogg, I'm very sorry for that mistake. The billionaire's expression changed instantly. His eyes widened and a light blush took over his face. Wait. What? She murmured. Snoop Dogg smiled again, this time with even more amusement. Ah, so now you care who I am? The shock was immediate. Some people started to murmur among themselves. The billionaire's friends, who had previously laughed and mocked, now looked at her without knowing what to say. The organizer, still visibly irritated, turned to her. You just insulted one of our most important guests of the night. The silence was broken only by the murmurs of disbelief that began to permeate the room. The billionaire tried to hide her embarrassment, but it was impossible. She knew she had made a colossal mistake. Now, I want to hear from you. Has anyone ever judged you based on your appearance? Have you ever seen a situation where someone belittled another person and felt bad afterwards? Right here in the comments, the game has changed if you believe that life always finds a way to teach humility to those who need it. I read everything, so leave your opinion below and hold on tight, because this story is far from over. You won't believe what happened after the truth came out. The billionaire tried to fix her mistake, but it was too late. The damage was done. And the poetic revenge that came next was simply unforgettable. The billionaire's name was Victoria Lancaster, a name known among the richest and most influential. Real estate businesswoman, heiress to a colossal fortune, she prided herself on being the personification of luxury and power. His presence at events like this was not only expected, but revered. Business owners, technology moguls, celebrities and investors wanted to be on his side, not out of admiration, but out of pure interest. Victoria dictated rules, influenced markets, and was used to being treated like a true queen. But for someone with so much money and influence, there was something Victoria didn't possess: humility. She didn't see value in people beyond their bank accounts and what they could offer. For her, status was everything. And anyone who didn't display the obvious signs of wealth, expensive jewelry, designer clothes, an aura of exclusivity, was nothing more than an extra in the grandiose setting in which she saw herself as the protagonist. It was exactly this mentality that made her look at Snoop Dogg and see not a global icon, not a successful businessman, not a music legend, but just a man dressed simply without extravagant adornment. To her, he was invisible, or worse, someone she felt entitled to ridicule. This guy should be serving the drinks, not participating in the event, she said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, and maybe even Snoop Dogg. The group burst into laughter again. Some tried to hide it, but it was clear that they were having fun with the situation. Victoria raised her glass of champagne, as if toasting her own joke. I bet he got here mistaken. Maybe you're looking for someone to ask for an autograph. he added, delicately swirling the golden liquid in the glass, savoring every moment of its superiority. His contemptuous gaze remained fixed on Snoop Dogg, waiting for some reaction, some sign of embarrassment, but he continued exactly as he was, serene, calm, as if the situation was nothing new to him. In fact, that slight smile on his face showed that he was enjoying watching fate itself prepare the change. His indifference irritated Victoria. Used to seeing others desperately try to justify or defend themselves in the face of her arrogance, she didn't expect anyone to simply ignore her provocation. It made her want to go further, push the limits of humiliation. "I don't think he has an invitation. Better get him out of here," she said, giving a significant look to one of the security guards. The security guard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. He had already recognized Snoop Dogg and knew full well that this was a terrible idea. But Victoria was powerful and was used to having her will done without question. "Ma'am, maybe he's—" the security guard began, trying to suggest that that wasn't the best decision. Maybe nothing interrupted Victoria, rolling her eyes. "If he was someone important, he would already be at my table, and not sitting alone like some stranger." Her words cut through the room like a cold blade. Some guests who were nearby stopped talking and started paying attention. The laughter at her table subsided, as even the billionaire's friends realized she was going too far. But she didn't notice. Or if he noticed, he simply didn't care. "Come on, do your job," Victoria ordered, waving her hand as if dismissing an incompetent employee. The security guard took one last look at Snoop Dogg, who was still impassive, and finally started walking towards him. But before he could get to the rapper, a buzz began to take over the room. The event organizer, a well-dressed man with a serious expression, crossed the space with firm steps, heading directly towards Victoria. His face indicated that he was far from happy. She noticed his approach and frowned, not understanding why. "Mrs. Lancaster," said the organizer, his voice filled with cold formality. "Is there a problem here?" Victoria cast a quick glance at Snoop Dogg before responding, as if she didn't want to miss the chance to reinforce her position. "Yes, actually, there is. This man does not seem like a suitable guest for an event of this level. I was just making sure everyone's experience wasn't compromised." She said this as if she were performing a public service, as if she were protecting the integrity of the event from an unwanted intruder. The organizer took a deep breath. The silence around was absolute. Many people had already realized what was happening and were watching the situation unfold with pure curiosity. His gaze turned to Snoop Dogg, who remained motionless, just watching the arrogance unfold in front of him. "Mrs. Lancaster," said the organizer, with a lower tone of voice, as if trying to avoid the inevitable. "Mr. Dogg is one of our honored guests." The impact of these words was immediate. Victoria's face went pale for a moment, as if her brain was trying to process the information. "What?" she stammered, losing, for the first time that night, her absolute confidence. The organizer just nodded, without saying anything else. He knew he didn't need to. The damage was already done. Victoria's eyes widened, and her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to say something, but no words came out. The laughter that once came so easily to her was now completely gone from her face. Her friends, who had laughed and mocked along with her, began to look away, subtly moving away, as if they wanted to make it clear that they had nothing to do with it. The security guard, who was about to approach Snoop Dogg, stopped immediately, almost frozen in place. And Snoop Dogg? He just smiled, a calm smile, without anger, without rushing. He knew the turnaround was just beginning. And hold on tight, because this story still has a lot to happen. You won't believe what Snoop Dogg did next. The billionaire tried to apologize, but it was too late. What happened next was a true example of poetic revenge. Get ready, because the twist that comes next is simply unbelievable. The silence was immediate. As if a huge weight had fallen on the room, all conversations were interrupted, and eyes began to turn towards the center of the conflict. The event organizer, a man with impeccable posture and a sharp gaze, approached with quick steps, his face filled with a seriousness that made the billionaire instantly lose some of her confidence. Victoria Lancaster, however, still didn't understand what was about to happen. For her, that man was there to reaffirm what was already obvious, that poorly dressed guy should not be present in such an exclusive environment. Snoop Dogg, on the other hand, continued unabated. His serene gaze conveyed an almost provocative calm. He already knew that the turnaround was approaching, but he didn't need to rush anything. Fate had its own rhythm, and he just waited for the right moment. The billionaire crossed her arms and smiled, as if she had already won the argument. His tone was full of arrogance as he turned to the organizer. "I'm glad someone with authority finally came to resolve this," she said, casting a contemptuous look at Snoop Dogg. "I was already losing patience with this ridiculous situation." The organizer kept his eyes fixed on her, but his gaze did not convey agreement. On the contrary, "Mrs. Lancaster," he began, his voice firm and controlled, "can you explain to me exactly what is happening here?" Victoria rolled her eyes, as if annoyed at having to explain something so obvious. This man clearly does not belong at this event. He doesn't have the right profile to be here, and, honestly, it's absurd that anyone allowed him to enter. I thought it was a selective event, not a place open to anyone who decides to show up. Snoop Dogg remained silent, watching every word. He didn't need to defend himself. Fate itself would do that for him. The organizer sighed, closing his eyes for a brief moment before finally turning to Snoop Dogg. "Mr. Dogg, I'm deeply sorry for the inconvenience." The billionaire's expression instantly transformed. His superior smile froze on his face. "What?" His voice now carried a trace of confusion. The organizer turned to her, his stance unshakable. "Ms. Lancaster, this event was organized in partnership with several influential figures from the worlds of business, entertainment, and culture. Snoop Dogg isn't just one of our most important guests. He's one of tonight's main investors." The shock was visible. An uncomfortable silence took over the billionaire's group of friends, who, until a few seconds ago, were laughing along with her. Now, they looked away, as if they were trying to get away from the situation as quickly as possible. Victoria blinked a few times, trying to process the information. This must be a mistake," she said, her voice wavering for the first time. The organizer maintained his firm stance. "There is no mistake. Not only is Snoop Dogg one of tonight's main investors, he was also personally invited by the hosts." The billionaire felt a chill run down her spine. Her world, which had seemed so solid and safe seconds ago, was beginning to crumble before her. The silence was overwhelming. All eyes were now on her, waiting to see her reaction. His friends, who had previously laughed and applauded his humiliations, now avoided any eye contact, realizing that this was a losing battle. And then Snoop Dogg finally broke his silence. "So, Mrs. Lancaster, do you still think I shouldn't be here?" His tone was calm, but there was a subtle touch of irony, a kind of silent revenge that didn't need to be said explicitly. Victoria opened and closed her mouth a few times, as if trying to find words to justify herself, but nothing seemed adequate. His confidence was crumbling by the second. I didn't know," she said, her voice lower now. Snoop Dogg smiled, but there was no malice in his expression. There was something much worse for Victoria than being the target of anger, being the target of contempt. And at that moment, she realized that she wasn't even worthy of Snoop Dogg's attention. The event organizer took a deep breath before continuing. "Mr. Dogg, again, I deeply regret any inconvenience. We will ensure your experience here is the best possible." Snoop Dogg just nodded. "It's okay, partner. Sometimes people only learn the hard way." The sentence sounded like a final blow. Victoria Lancaster, who once exuded arrogance, was now nothing more than a shadow of her former self. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a situation like this, where someone full of arrogance ended up being humiliated by their own destiny? Comment here, karma doesn't fail, if you believe that life always finds a way to put everyone in their place. I read all the comments, so leave yours below. And hold on tight, because this story isn't over yet. If you thought Victoria's humiliation had already reached its limit, wait until you see what Snoop Dogg did next. The real change was yet to come, and it was something that no one there expected. Absolute silence took over the hall, and all eyes turned to the event organizer. Victoria's breath caught in her chest, as if time had stopped. His mind desperately tried to process what he had just heard. It was as if a bomb had exploded right in front of her, and the shrapnel of her arrogance now fell around her. The organizer maintained a firm and elegant posture, but his voice carried an unquestionable weight when he repeated, with an even more emphatic tone, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome one of our special guests tonight. None other than Snoop Dogg." The shock was immediate. A buzz began to spread among the guests, and the sepulchral silence gave way to whispers of disbelief. Some looks of surprise turned to Victoria, while others were already fixed on Snoop Dogg, who remained where he was, without showing any exaggerated emotion. He didn't need to. The impact of the moment spoke for itself. Victoria, who until seconds ago was overflowing with confidence and superiority, now seemed petrified. His wide eyes reflected the terror of someone who realizes, too late, that they have made an irreparable mistake. His face, once filled with arrogance, was now pale, as if all the blood had drained from his skin. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. His lips trembled slightly, and his hands, once firm holding the champagne glass, were now so rigid that the glass could break at any moment. His friends, who had previously laughed and applauded his jokes, now looked uncomfortable, looking away, trying to distance themselves from the embarrassment they were witnessing. But the final blow was yet to come. The organizer continued, now walking towards Snoop Dogg, showing the respect that Victoria should have had from the beginning. "And not just that," he continued with a discreet smile. "Snoop Dogg is not just a special guest tonight. He is one of the main investors in this event." The impact of those words was deafening. The reactions were instantaneous. One of Victoria's friends, who was previously laughing with her, ended up choking on his own drink. Some guests put their hands to their mouths, completely surprised. And Victoria? She looked like she had been punched invisibly. His posture collapsed, and his legs gave way for a brief moment. If there was one way to make the humiliation he was already facing worse, this was the coup de grace. The entire room now watched, with a mixture of fascination and shock, as the woman who minutes ago had been on top of the world was now reduced to nothing more than a shadow of herself. And then Snoop Dogg finally stood up. He didn't make any sudden movements, no overreactions. He just got up from the chair with the same calmness he maintained throughout the scene, straightened his jacket, and looked directly at Victoria. The weight of his gaze made her instinctively step back. For the first time in her life, she felt something she never thought she would. Fear. Not a physical fear, but a much deeper fear. The fear of contempt. The fear of having your reputation ruined. The fear of realizing that, at that exact moment, she was the one being judged by everyone around her. "So, Mrs. Lancaster," said Snoop Dogg, with a casual, almost friendly tone, but full of sharp sarcasm, "still think I shouldn't be here?" Victoria opened and closed her mouth a few times, but couldn't say anything. His words, which had once flowed with arrogance, were now completely lacking. The silence in the hall was overwhelming. Everyone was waiting for his response, but nothing came. The only thing that remained was his expression of despair as he looked around, as if looking for a way out, an escape, a way to disappear from this unbearable situation. Snoop Dogg kept his gaze fixed on her for a few more seconds, letting the weight of reality fall on her. Then, with a small smile on the corner of his lips, he broke eye contact and turned to the organizer. "I think now everyone knows who I am." The hall erupted in laughter and applause. Relief and admiration were visible on the guests' faces. Those who were previously uncertain about what was happening were now completely involved in the epic turnaround they witnessed. Victoria, in turn, seemed smaller and smaller. His rigid posture was now hunched over, his eyes fixed on the ground, unable to face anyone around him. She tried to regain some dignity. She tried to force a smile, a gesture, anything that would get her out of that humiliating position. But it was too late. The game had completely changed. And get ready, because this story isn't over yet. If you thought Victoria's humiliation was enough, wait until you see what happened when she tried to right her wrong. What Snoop Dogg did next was simply unbelievable. The room was still vibrating with the impact of the revelation. The name Snoop Dogg, which minutes before had been treated with disdain by Victoria Lancaster, now resonated as a symbol of power and respect in that luxurious environment. Snoop Dogg's discreet smile remained on his face, but there was something more there, something that only the most attentive could perceive. It wasn't just a satisfied smile. It was the smile of someone who knew that the lesson wasn't over yet. The event organizer was still by his side, but now all eyes were fixed on Snoop Dogg. The anticipation in the air was palpable. He straightened his jacket, glanced around the room, then walked calmly to the main stage, where a microphone waited. Victoria, on the other hand, was completely still. His expression was no longer one of simple embarrassment. It was something deeper. It was the look of someone who realized that his castle of arrogance was crumbling in front of everyone. Snoop Dogg took the microphone and looked directly at her. The entire hall held its breath. I just wanted to enjoy the night. But some people still judge others by their appearance. The sentence echoed through the room like a punch in the stomach. The tone of his voice was not aggressive, but each word carried an undeniable weight. It was as if he was summing up the entire experience of that night in a single sentence. Victoria, who minutes before had been laughing shamelessly, now had a completely red face. The sarcastic smile he carried before turned into a tense, pressed line. His eyes stared at the ground, unable to look at anyone around him. Snoop Dogg looked around, making a point of pausing for a few seconds. The silence was absolute. Everyone waited anxiously for what he would say next. Then he smiled, and to make the night even better, "I'm going to donate a millionaire amount to an institution that teaches humility." The hall exploded in applause and laughter. Change had been given in a way that no one expected. The guests laughed, applauded, some even whistled in approval. The irony of that situation was undeniable. Victoria Lancaster, who minutes before had taken pride in publicly humiliating someone, was now the very symbol of what it meant to need a lesson in humility. The billionaire's face remained completely still. Her stiff posture showed that she was holding herself back from showing even more discomfort. But it was impossible to hide. His expression said it all. Snoop Dogg, for his part, didn't look at her again. He didn't need to. The lesson had been taught, and the impact of those words would echo in Victoria's mind for a long time. The applause continued for a few more seconds before Snoop Dogg spoke again. Because, at the end of the day, no one is better than anyone else. It doesn't matter money, clothes, or status. What really matters is how you treat people. The clapping grew even louder. Some people nodded in agreement. Others exchanged glances, visibly touched by the message. And then came the final blow. "And you want to know the best?" he continued. "This donation will be made in the name of Victoria Lancaster." The explosion of reactions was instantaneous. Some people laughed out loud. Others simply stood with their mouths open. The humiliation was now total. Victoria, who was already trying to compose herself, felt the impact like an electric shock. Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. Destiny had taken care of putting things in place. Camera flashes went off. Journalists and influencers present were already starting to post the turnaround on social media. The billionaire, known for her arrogance, would now have her name linked to an act of charity that she never wanted to do. Snoop Dogg placed the microphone back on the stand and walked off the stage to a hail of applause. He didn't need anything else. His message was clear, and poetic revenge had been served in the most elegant way possible. As he walked back to his table, greeting a few people along the way, Victoria remained motionless. She knew the night was ruined. "Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a turnaround like this, where poetic justice puts someone arrogant in their place? Comment here. Karma is relentless. If you believe that no one is above the law of life, I read all the comments, so leave yours here. And hold on tight, because this story isn't over yet. If you think Victoria has already learned her lesson, wait until you see what happened after social media exploded with this story. What came next was a true domino effect. And the consequences were even worse than she imagined. The impact of Snoop Dogg's words still hung over the room. The public, who had previously viewed the humiliation imposed by Victoria Lancaster as simple elitist entertainment, was now completely on the opposite side. They had witnessed a rare moment, poetic justice happening right before their eyes. Victoria, in turn, remained paralyzed. His face was still. His eyes wandered around the room, as if trying to find an escape point, a hole where he could hide, but there was no escape. The damage was done. The guests murmured among themselves. Some people whispered while looking at her. Others pretended that nothing had happened, but the truth was obvious. Victoria Lancaster's reputation would never be the same. The humiliation didn't just stop at the event. In the corners of the room, influencers, journalists, and business people were already typing furiously on their cell phones. Videos of the scene had been recorded, and in a matter of minutes, the scandal began to take over social media. No Twitter, hashtags como Victoria Desmascarada, Snoop Dogg humiliates Billionaire, and Karma Instantáneo exploded. On Instagram, stories showing the public's reaction and Victoria's shocked face racked up thousands of views per second. And then came the worst blow. The event, which was initially supposed to be a celebration between millionaires and investors, was now the stage for a real popular court. Comments began to appear in real time, in elite WhatsApp groups, on gossip pages, on business forums. Victoria Lancaster's name, once associated with wealth and power, was now tied to a global scandal of arrogance and prejudice. And she knew it. His breathing was shallow. His hands shook slightly as he held the glass of champagne, which no longer tasted the same. Every laugh, every look of disapproval, every whisper in the room was like a knife to his reputation. Snoop Dogg, on the other hand, remained relaxed. For him, this was not revenge. It was just a lesson that life had decided to teach at the right time. He walked slowly to the table where he was before and sat down calmly, without rushing, as if none of that had happened. He didn't need to rub Victoria's humiliation in her face. Destiny itself had already taken care of that. The billionaire, now visibly uncomfortable, picked up her cell phone and saw what she already feared. Her name plastered all over the internet, and the comments were relentless. This woman thought she could belittle Snoop Dogg? Karma doesn't fail, millionaire humiliated live, and rightly so. Learn your lesson, Victoria. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Respect is earned. Victoria felt her heart accelerate. He tried to take a deep breath, tried to maintain his posture, but it was impossible to ignore the weight of it. Everything she had built, her image as a powerful and unattainable woman, was now in tatters. She looked around. His friends, who had previously laughed alongside him, now avoided eye contact. None of them wanted to be associated with someone who had become the symbol of arrogance being publicly punished. It was then that she realized that her only option was to get out of there. She got up, straightened her dress, picked up her bag, and walked towards the exit with quick steps. But what would once have been a gesture of authority now seemed like an escape, and the entire room noticed it. Snoop Dogg watched the scene without saying anything. He just smiled slightly and picked up his glass of drink, bringing it to his lips as if toasting the irony of the moment. The world was really turning around, and that was the big lesson of that night. Because in the end, it didn't matter how much money someone had, how many companies they ran, or how many people fawned over their presence. Respect couldn't be bought, humility was not optional, and Victoria Lancaster learned this the hard way. And now I want to know, did you follow this story until the end? If so, tell me in the comments by writing, "Respect is worth more than luxury." So I know that you are part of the team that believes that the world always finds a way to teach humility to those who need it. And don't forget, if this twist caught your attention, leave a like because it helps a lot to continue bringing more stories like this. And of course, if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity now to subscribe and activate the bell, because here every week there are stories of poetic revenge, relentless karma and justice being done. But wait a minute. Before leaving, now click on the next video that appears on the screen, because if you thought this story was unbelievable, the one that comes next will shock you even more. See you there.